I missed you. Those were the first words Caleb Bennett said after 3 months apart, but it was the way he said them that made me forget how to breathe. He stood outside my apartment at 1:13 in the morning, soaked from a Chicago rain that had turned the street below into ribbons of reflected gold and red, his dark blonde hair dripping onto the collar of a jacket I had seen him wear 100 times before. Everything about him should have felt familiar. Caleb had been my best friend for 8 years. I knew the scar beside his left eyebrow, the tiny crease that appeared between his eyes when he was worried, the way he shoved his hands into his pockets whenever he had something difficult to say. I knew he hated olives, loved terrible action movies, and ordered his burgers medium with nothing but cheddar and mustard. I knew practically everything about Caleb Bennett. Most importantly, I knew he was straight. That fact had been the quiet boundary around our friendship for years, an invisible line I had learned never to cross. So when I opened my door that night and found him staring at me like I had become someone he no longer knew how to understand, I did what I always did when Caleb got too close to the truth. I smiled. "You drove across the city in this weather to tell me that?" I asked. Usually, he would have laughed. Usually, he would have pushed past me, complained about my apartment being too warm, opened my refrigerator without permission, and acted like he lived there. He had a key, after all. He had been using it for years. But tonight he stayed in the hallway. Water slid from his jacket onto the faded carpet between us. "I tried calling," he said. "My phone died on the flight." "I know." His answer came too quickly. Something about those 2 words tightened my chest. "You know?" Caleb looked away for half a second. "I checked your flight." I stared at him. "You checked my flight?" "Yeah." "Why?" His jaw tightened. There it was again, that crease between his eyebrows. 8 years of friendship had taught me how to read every expression on his face. Yet suddenly, I couldn't read this one. "Because you weren't answering." "I was on an airplane, Cal." "I know that." "Then what's going on?" He finally stepped inside, and I closed the door behind him. The apartment seemed smaller with him there. Maybe because I hadn't seen him in 92 days. Not that I had counted. Okay, I had counted. I had also spent those 92 days trying very hard to stop loving my best friend. Seattle was supposed to help. 3 months, 2,000 miles, a photography contract, unfamiliar streets, unfamiliar faces. I had convinced myself distance could accomplish what 8 years of common sense hadn't. Then Caleb showed up at my door and erased 3 months of progress in approximately 10 seconds. "You look different," he said. "It's called a haircut." "Not that." His eyes stayed on mine. "You seem different." I forced another smile. Maybe Seattle improved me. Maybe. The word landed strangely. I walked toward the kitchen because standing still under his gaze had become unbearable. "Coffee." "It's 1 in the morning." "Since when has that stopped you?" "Evan." I stopped. The sound of my name in his voice was different too. Softer. Almost uncertain. Behind me, I heard him take 1 step closer. "I really missed you." I swallowed and kept my back to him. There were sentences you could survive hearing from your straight best friend only if you pretended they meant less than they did. This was one of them. "I missed you too," I said lightly. "See? Crisis solved. Tomorrow we can get breakfast, you can complain about my photography, I'll insult your architecture, and civilization will recover." Silence. I turned around. Caleb wasn't smiling. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen in 8 years, as though he had spent 3 months searching for an answer and had finally arrived at my door terrified of what it might be. "No, Evan," he said quietly. My heartbeat stumbled. Caleb took another step toward me, then stopped, leaving a careful distance between us. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Inside, neither of us moved. "That's not what I meant." And suddenly, for the first time since I'd fallen in love with my straight best friend, I wondered if the line between us had ever really been where I thought it was. 3 months earlier, Caleb was stretched across my couch with 1 sock missing, a takeout container balanced on his stomach, and absolutely no idea that I was trying to figure out how to stop loving him. That was the problem with loving your best friend in secret. The important moments never looked important while they were happening. They looked like Tuesday nights and cold pizza. They sounded like arguments over movies and Caleb laughing when I threatened to change the locks because he kept stealing my coffee. We had met 8 years earlier during our freshman year of college, when he walked into the wrong photography class, sat beside me, and stayed for 20 minutes before realizing everyone else had a camera. Somehow, that mistake became a friendship. By 25, I could measure my adult life in Caleb moments. There was the road trip to Nashville when our air conditioner quit somewhere in Kentucky and we drove with every window down. There was the winter he showed up with groceries after I caught the flu. There were Sunday breakfasts at Miller's Diner, where the waitress stopped asking for our orders because Caleb always wanted pancakes and I always wanted eggs and toast. There were birthdays, bad jobs, family holidays, apartment moves, and relationships that came and went. His relationships, mostly. Caleb dated women easily. Beautiful women. Smart women. Women who sometimes looked at me with the polite suspicion reserved for a best friend who knew too much. Whenever a relationship ended, Caleb called me. I think something is wrong with me. He told me once after breaking up with a woman he had dated for almost a year. We were sitting on my kitchen floor because the table was covered with photographs. Nothing is wrong with you, I said. Then why do I never miss them the way I am supposed to? I should have recognized the significance of that question. Instead, I protected myself with a joke. Maybe you are emotionally defective. He threw a dish towel at me, and the moment disappeared. That was what we did. We turned dangerous truths into jokes before either of us could examine them. By the time the Seattle offer arrived, I was tired of pretending. It did not hurt. The contract was good. 3 months photographing historic neighborhoods for a travel publication, with housing included and enough money to finally replace my aging camera. I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. Caleb found out that night. He was on my couch when I mentioned it. He sat upright, so quickly the takeout container nearly slid onto the floor. Seattle? Seattle. As in Washington? I stared at him. Do you know another one? For how long? 3 months. His expression changed. It was subtle, but I knew him too well to miss it. When were you going to tell me? I am telling you now. You already accepted. This afternoon. Caleb stood and carried his food into the kitchen even though he had barely touched it. That is 2,000 miles away. Approximately. Evan, I know how maps work. Then why are we discussing mileage? He turned toward me, frustrated in a way that made no sense. Because 3 months is a long time. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked at him and felt every unsaid word pressing against my ribs. 3 months was exactly what I needed. 3 months without late-night calls. Without his jacket hanging beside mine. Without watching him smile at another woman and reminding myself that being his best friend had to be enough. You will survive, I said. Caleb looked at me for several quiet seconds. That is not what I am worried about. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I was afraid of inventing hope where there was none. So I picked up my camera and pretended to check the lens. Caleb watched me from across the room, and neither of us knew it yet. But that was the first night distance entered our friendship before I had traveled a single mile. The morning I left for Seattle, Caleb arrived at my apartment 40 minutes early and claimed it was because he did not trust me to reach the airport on time. I knew that was nonsense. I had never missed a flight in my life, while Caleb once arrived at O'Hare without his wallet and had to drive all the way home. Still, I let him carry my suitcase downstairs, and neither of us mentioned how unusually quiet he was during the drive. Chicago was barely awake. The sky washed in pale gray as we moved along the expressway. Usually Caleb filled silence without trying. That morning, he kept both hands on the steering wheel and changed the radio station 3 times before turning it off completely. You know there are phones in Seattle, I said. Very advanced city. Funny. I thought so. He glanced at me, then back at the road. You could still change your mind. My smile faded. About the job? About leaving for 3 months. There was something dangerously close to hurt in his voice, and for one reckless second, I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say that I was leaving because being near him had become too easy and too painful at the same time. Instead, I looked through the passenger window. It is 3 months, Caleb, not 3 years. At the terminal, he insisted on carrying my suitcase even though it had wheels. We stopped before security, surrounded by rolling luggage, coffee cups, hurried goodbyes, and announcements echoing overhead. Caleb shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. Call me when you land. I will. And send me the address of the apartment. Why? In case you disappear. I laughed. You know photographers are legally allowed to survive without architects. He finally smiled, but it vanished almost immediately. Then he hugged me. Caleb had hugged me hundreds of times. This one was different only because it lasted 2 seconds longer than it should have, and when his hand pressed between my shoulder blades, I nearly forgot every reason I was leaving. I pulled away first. See you in 3 months. Yeah, he said softly. 3 months. I walked toward security without looking back until the last possible second. Caleb was still standing exactly where I had left him. Seattle gave me everything I had asked for. Distance, unfamiliar streets, long workdays, and enough rain to make Chicago weather seem reasonable. For the first 2 weeks, Caleb texted every morning. Did you eat? Did you find decent coffee yet? Send pictures. Then came photographs of ordinary things from home. Our booth at Miller's Diner, the ridiculous ceramic dog in my apartment that he had always hated, the skyline from his office window. One night, he sent me a picture of an empty chair across from him with the message, "Breakfast is boring now." I stared at it longer than I should have. I began answering less quickly, not because I cared less, but because I cared too much. If distance was supposed to teach me how to live without Caleb, talking to him every day defeated the purpose. His messages changed. You busy? Everything okay? Call when you can. Then one Thursday night, my phone rang while I was editing photographs. Hey, I answered. Caleb was silent for a moment. Hey, what happened? Nothing. You only call this late when something happened. Another pause. I went to Miller's tonight. I smiled despite myself. Congratulations. I sat in our booth. Our booth. 2 harmless words, except they did not feel harmless anymore. Caleb, I know. It sounds stupid. His voice softened. I just thought you would be there. My chest tightened. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then someone called my name from across the studio, and Caleb heard it. Who is that? He asked. Noah. He works on the project with me. Noah, Caleb repeated, as if testing the name. Yeah. Another silence. You should go, he said. Caleb, I can talk. No. It is fine. Have fun. The call ended before I could answer. 2,000 miles away, Caleb sat alone in a diner booth we had shared for years, staring at the empty seat across from him. And for the first time, my absence was beginning to ask him a question my presence never had. Noah Parker entered my life without asking for anything from me, which was probably why being around him felt so unexpectedly easy. He was 27, worked as a graphic designer for the same Seattle project, and possessed the rare ability to make conversation without turning every silence into something that needed fixing. Over the next few weeks, we started grabbing coffee after work, then dinner whenever our schedules ran late. No one knew I was gay because I mentioned an old boyfriend during a conversation about terrible first dates, and unlike the complicated secret I carried around Caleb, there was nothing difficult about Noah knowing. One Friday evening, after we finished photographing a restored theater downtown, Noah convinced me to walk with him to a small restaurant near Pike Place Market. The air smelled like rain and roasted coffee, and for once I was not thinking about Chicago every 5 minutes. Noah told a ridiculous story about accidentally attending the wrong wedding reception in Portland, and I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. There, he said, pointing at me. That. What? You finally look like somebody who came to Seattle instead of somebody waiting to go home. The observation landed closer to the truth than I wanted. I am having fun. You are getting better at pretending. Before I could answer, Noah lifted his phone. Hold still. Absolutely not. He took the picture anyway. I was laughing when he captured it, leaning across the table while city lights blurred behind us. Later that night, he posted the photograph with a simple caption about surviving another week of work. I thought nothing of it. In Chicago, Caleb was having dinner with a woman named Lauren, someone his coworker had been trying to introduce him to for months. Lauren was funny, successful, and easy to talk to. Under normal circumstances, Caleb would have considered the evening a good date. Then his phone lit up beside his water glass. He glanced down and saw my face on the screen. I was smiling in a way he had not seen since I left Chicago, and Noah was sitting beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. Caleb stopped listening to whatever Lauren was saying. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah. Sorry. He locked the screen. 30 seconds later, he checked it again. Lauren noticed. Who was that? My best friend. The answer came instantly. Lauren raised an eyebrow. I was asking about the guy sitting next to him. Caleb looked back at the photograph. Noah. You know him? Not really. Then why do you sound annoyed? I do not. Lauren smiled with the patient expression of someone watching another person lose an argument with himself. Okay. Caleb put the phone face down, but the picture had already lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable. For the rest of dinner, He wondered who Noah was, how often we spent time together, and why I had never mentioned that he could make me laugh like that. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was making coffee. Caleb had sent a message at 6:14 Chicago time. "Who is Noah?" I stared at the words and smiled despite myself. "Just a friend from work," I replied. 3 dots appeared immediately. They disappeared, returned, disappeared again. Finally, "You two seem close." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Are you interrogating me, Bennett?" His reply took almost a minute. "Just asking." I should have left it there, but some stubborn part of me wanted to test the strange tension that had appeared between us. "He is taking me to a concert tonight." This time, there were no 3 dots. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Caleb never answered. That evening, Noah and I were walking toward the concert when he glanced at me. "Your friend from Chicago? What about him? You have checked your phone 9 times. I slipped it into my pocket. "He is just my best friend." Noah studied me for a moment, then gave a quiet smile that made me uncomfortable because it looked too much like understanding. "Sure," he said, "but I am starting to wonder if anyone ever explained that to him." The strangest part of missing someone was discovering how many places they occupied when they were not there. Caleb learned that slowly. I was in the passenger seat of his car whenever he reached for the radio and remembered I always changed his station. I was in the grocery store when he passed the cereal I bought even though he claimed it tasted like cardboard. I was in Miller's diner every Sunday morning, sitting invisibly across from him in the booth where the waitress still brought 2 menus out of habit. He stopped going after the 3rd week. None of it made sense to him. Caleb had missed people before. He had missed college friends after graduation. He had missed girlfriends after breakups, at least for a while. This was different. My absence did not feel like nostalgia. It felt like his life had continued with one essential piece quietly removed. After seeing the photograph of Noah and me, that emptiness became harder to ignore. Caleb opened the picture, more times than he would ever admit. He studied my smile, then Noah's, then the small distance between our shoulders. Each time he felt the same unreasonable irritation. He told himself he was protective because I was his best friend. Then he remembered all the women I had dated over the years and realized he had never cared this much before. Meanwhile, in Seattle, I was trying to do exactly what I had promised myself I would do. Live. Work. Stop arranging my emotional life around someone who could never meet me in the same place. Noah helped without trying. One evening, we stayed late at the studio sorting photographs from the waterfront. My phone had been charging on a table across the room while I adjusted color levels on my laptop. "Your phone keeps ringing," Noah said. "Can you see who it is?" He walked over and glanced at the screen. "Caleb." My hand stopped above the keyboard. "Of course it is. Could you answer it? Tell him I will call back." Noah picked up. "Hello." I could not hear Caleb's response, but Noah's eyebrows lifted. "No, this is Noah. Evan is right here." A pause followed. "Yes, that Noah." I looked up. Noah was clearly trying not to smile. He handed me the phone, but before letting go, he lowered his voice. "Your best friend sounds jealous." I gave him a warning look and took the call. "Hey, why is Noah answering your phone?" Caleb asked. No greeting. No joke. Because I was working. At this hour? It is barely 9. With him, I leaned back in my chair. "Caleb, what exactly is your problem with Noah?" Silence. "I do not have a problem with him. You have never met him." "Exactly. That makes even less sense." Caleb exhaled slowly. "Forget it." "No. You called me." Another silence stretched between Seattle and Chicago. Finally, he said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." Every clever response disappeared from my mind. "Caleb, I know. That sounded weird." "A little." He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Everything feels weird lately." Before I could ask what he meant, Noah called from behind me. "Tell him you are going to miss dinner." Caleb heard him. "You have plans?" "We were going to grab something after work." "Right." His voice changed immediately. "Go." "Caleb, wait." "Have a good night, Evan." He ended the call. I stared at the dark screen. Across the room, Noah folded his arms. "I am going to say something, and you are probably going to hate me for it." "Then maybe do not." That man does not sound like somebody worried about losing his best friend. I looked away. He is straight. Maybe he is. Maybe he is figuring something out. I do not know him. Noah picked up his jacket. But I know what jealousy sounds like. 2,000 miles away, Caleb sat alone in his car beneath the lights of his apartment building, replaying one sentence in his head. I just wanted to hear your voice. For the first time, he stopped asking why he missed me so much. A more frightening question had taken its place. Why did the thought of me choosing someone else feel like losing something he had never admitted he wanted? By the time my flight touched down at O'Hare 3 weeks later, I had convinced myself that Noah was wrong. Caleb was not jealous. Caleb was lonely. There was a difference, and believing in that difference felt safer than spending another night wondering whether 8 years of friendship had been hiding something neither of us understood. My flight landed shortly after midnight, delayed by weather, and I switched on my phone while the plane rolled toward the gate. 11 messages appeared. 3 were from my mother. 1 was from Noah wishing me luck. 7 were from Caleb. The first asked whether my flight was on time. The last simply said, "Call me when you land." I smiled despite myself, but before I could answer, my screen went black. The battery had died. By the time I reached my apartment, Chicago rain was falling hard enough to blur the streetlights outside my windows. I dropped my suitcase beside the couch, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room listening to the familiar hum of my refrigerator. Home should have felt comforting. Instead, everything seemed strangely unfinished. Then someone knocked. I looked at the clock. 1:13 in the morning. When I opened the door, Caleb was standing there soaked from the rain. For a second, neither of us spoke. 3 months disappeared and remained between us at the same time. He looked exactly like the man I had left at the airport, yet something in his expression had changed. There was no easy grin, no sarcastic welcome home. Only relief. "I missed you," he said. I tried to make the moment smaller because that was what I had always done with Caleb. I joked about him crossing the city in the middle of a storm. I offered coffee. I told him I had missed him too. Then his face tightened. "No, Evan, that is not what I meant." The room went very still. "Then what did you mean?" Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He walked toward the window instead, pushing wet hair away from his forehead. "I do not know." My heart sank at the answer, but he kept talking. "That is the problem. I do not know what is happening to me." "Caleb, you are exhausted." "I am not." He turned around. "For 3 months, I kept reaching for my phone because something happened and you were the person I wanted to tell. I kept going places we always went together, and they felt wrong without you. I went on a date with Lauren and spent half the night thinking about you." I stared at him. "Why?" "I do not know." His voice softened. Then I saw that picture. I knew immediately. Noah. Caleb looked down. Yeah, there it was. Not anger. Not accusation. Something much more vulnerable. "Are you seeing him?" he asked. The question was so quiet I almost missed it beneath the rain. "Why does that matter?" Caleb looked at me again. "Just answer me." "No. Noah and I are friends." Relief crossed Caleb's face before he could hide it. That tiny reaction changed the entire room. I had spent 8 years training myself not to mistake affection for possibility, but I could not explain away what I had just seen. "You are jealous," I said. Caleb immediately shook his head. "I am not. You drove across Chicago after midnight because I did not answer my phone. You asked about Noah before you asked about Seattle. You just looked relieved when I told you I was not dating him. I know how it sounds. Then tell me what it is." He stepped closer, stopping several feet away. "I wish I could." For the first time, Caleb Bennett looked afraid of his own honesty. "All I know is that when you left, I thought I was going to miss hanging out with my best friend." He paused, searching my face. "But that is not what happened." My pulse quickened. "What happened?" Caleb swallowed. "I started missing you in places you had never even been." Neither of us moved. Outside, Chicago disappeared behind sheets of rain. Inside, the safest friendship I had ever known suddenly stood on unfamiliar ground. Then Caleb asked the one question I had spent 8 years believing I would never hear from him. "Evan, what if I have been wrong about what you are to me?" For 8 years, I had imagined what it might feel like if Caleb ever looked at me and saw something beyond friendship. In every version, I knew exactly what to say. Standing in my apartment at nearly 2 in the morning with rain tracing silver lines down the windows, I realized imagination had been much kinder than reality. "You cannot ask me that," I said. Caleb's expression tightened. "Why not?" "Because you do not know what you are asking. That is why I am asking you." "No. You are asking me to explain something happening inside you." He looked away, and the silence between us felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the couch. Caleb remained by the window. "I have dated women my entire life," he said finally. "I know. I cared about them. I know that too. Then why did none of those relationships feel like this? I looked up. Like what? He gave a frustrated laugh. Like I notice when you are gone. Like I care who makes you laugh. Like hearing another man answer your phone makes me feel something I cannot explain. Every word pulled at a hope I had spent years teaching myself to bury. Caleb moved closer and sat at the opposite end of the couch. For once, neither of us reached for humor. Maybe I am confused, he said. Maybe I should have figured this out years ago. I do not know. You do not have to figure out your entire life tonight. Then what do I have to figure out? I met his eyes. Whether this is about me, or whether you are just afraid our friendship is changing. Caleb went quiet. His hand rested on the cushion between us, close enough that I could have touched it without moving more than an inch. What if it is about you? He asked. My throat tightened. Do not say that unless you mean it. Evan, I am serious. I stood and walked toward the kitchen, needing distance again. You think the last 3 months were difficult for you? I left because staying here was harder. Caleb rose slowly. What does that mean? There was no safe answer left. I turned toward him. It means I have been in love with you for years. Caleb froze. Saying it aloud should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like stepping into open air. I never told you because you were straight, and because being your friend mattered more than getting an answer I already thought I knew. Seattle was supposed to help me get over you. His face softened. Evan, I had no idea. That was the point. Why did you never tell me? Because I did not want to become an experiment if you ever got lonely or curious. Caleb flinched at the words. That is not what this is. Then tell me what it is. He stepped toward me. I am trying. Trying is not the same as knowing. He stopped less than a foot away. The room seemed to shrink around us. His gaze dropped briefly, then returned to my eyes, and suddenly I understood what he was about to do. For years, I had wanted that moment. Every instinct told me to stay still and let it happen. Caleb leaned closer, hesitant enough that I could have moved away. I placed my palm gently against his chest. No. He stopped immediately. Hurt crossed his face. Why? Because if you kiss me tonight, I will believe it means everything. My voice almost failed me. And tomorrow you might decide it meant confusion. I would never hurt you intentionally. I know. That is what makes this harder. I lowered my hand. Figure out whether you want me, Caleb, or whether you are simply terrified of losing me. He stood there for several seconds before nodding. At the door, he looked back at me. What if the answer is both? I swallowed. Then come back when you know which one. Makes you stay. Caleb left quietly. I listened to his footsteps disappear down the hallway. And for the first time in 8 years, I did not know when I would see my best friend again. Caleb did not call the next morning. He did not text that afternoon, either. By the second day, I had checked my phone often enough to become angry with myself. I had asked him for space to understand what he wanted, yet every hour of silence felt like evidence that I had finally destroyed the one relationship I had spent years trying to protect. Noah called from Seattle that evening. I told him everything except the parts one still could not say without feeling exposed. He listened quietly, then said, "You gave him a choice. Now let him make it." So I tried. I buried myself in work and focused on the small photography exhibition I had scheduled before leaving for Seattle. Friday evening arrived cold and clear, the storm clouds finally gone from Chicago. The gallery occupied a converted brick storefront in Wicker Park, with white walls, warm lights, and tall windows reflecting the city after sunset. My photographs covered 8 years of my life. Train platforms, empty diners, strangers beneath umbrellas, quiet neighborhoods at dawn, and ordinary moments that had somehow become important because I had noticed them. Friends came. My mother came. Even Noah sent flowers from Seattle. Caleb did not come. At 7:30, I stopped watching the door. At 8:15, I convinced myself that was probably better. Then, near the far wall, I saw him. Caleb stood alone in a navy coat, looking at a photograph I had almost removed from the exhibition. I had taken it during our senior year of college on a road trip through Wisconsin. Caleb was sitting on the hood of his old car beside Lake Michigan, laughing at something I could no longer remember. Late afternoon sunlight caught in his hair, and for once he was not looking at the camera. He was looking at me. Beneath the photograph was a single word. Home. Caleb stayed there so long that the room seemed to disappear around him. When he finally turned, our eyes met across the gallery. He walked toward me slowly. "You came," I said. I almost did not. At least he was honest. "Why did you?" Caleb looked back at the photograph. Because I spent the last few days trying to answer your question. My heartbeat quickened. And I thought about Lauren. I thought about every woman I ever dated. I thought about whether I was panicking because you might move on without me. He paused. Then I thought about college. That terrible apartment you helped me move into. The night my dad had surgery and you sat with me in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours. Every job offer I called you about before I called my family. Every time something good happened, and you were the first person I wanted to tell. His eyes returned to mine. Then I saw that picture. It is old. That is the point. His voice softened. You called it home years before Seattle. Before Noah. Before any of this. I could barely breathe. Caleb stepped closer, but this time he left enough space for me to choose whether to close it. I have spent my whole life calling myself straight, because that was the word that made sense to me. Maybe I need time to understand whether another word fits better. I am not going to pretend I solved that in 3 days. Something in my chest loosened. He was not offering me a dramatic revelation. He was offering me honesty. Then what do you know? I asked. Caleb glanced around the gallery at 8 years of moments I had preserved, then looked at me with an expression so certain that I almost did not recognize him. I know I was jealous of Noah. A nervous smile touched his face. I know being away from you felt wrong. I know almost kissing you was not curiosity. He took a quiet breath. And I know I do not want you to be an experiment either. The room around us seemed to fade into soft voices and distant music. So what am I? I asked. Caleb looked once more at the photograph on the wall. When he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. For 8 years, every time I was lost, you were the person I came back to. His eyes held mine. I do not know exactly what word I am supposed to use for myself yet, Evan, but I know the word I use for you. I waited. Caleb smiled, small and nervous and completely real. Home. For a moment, I forgot we were standing in a crowded gallery. People moved around us with glasses of sparkling water and quiet conversations, but all I could hear was the word Caleb had chosen. Home. It was not a perfect explanation. It did not answer every question about tomorrow or next year, or what label Caleb might eventually choose for himself. Somehow, that made me trust it more. You really thought about this? I asked. Caleb gave me the nervous half smile I had known since college. I have barely thought about anything else. I looked toward the photograph on the wall. You know this could be complicated. We have been arguing about where to eat dinner for 8 years. Complicated does not scare me. I laughed, and the tension between us softened. Caleb stepped closer, stopping before our shoulders touched. His confidence disappeared for a second, replaced by something careful and vulnerable. Evan, can I kiss you? 8 years of impossible wishes came down to one simple question. I could have answered immediately, but I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. The warm gallery lights, the muted city beyond the windows, Caleb standing in front of me without pretending to have every answer. Yes, I said. He leaned in slowly enough to give me every chance to change my mind. I did not. The kiss was gentle and brief, almost hesitant, less like a declaration than a question we were finally brave enough to ask together. When we pulled apart, Caleb looked so serious that I started laughing. What? He asked. Nothing. You were laughing at me. A little. His ears turned pink. I just had my first kiss with a man. I feel like I deserve constructive feedback. That made me laugh harder. You did fine, Bennett. Fine. Do not make this competitive. Too late. And there he was again, my best friend, except the invisible line between us had moved. Caleb reached for my hand. He did not hide it when someone passed nearby. He simply held on. 3 months later, our lives looked surprisingly ordinary. Caleb still left coffee mugs everywhere. I still complained about his movie choices. We still went to Miller's Diner on Sundays, where the waitress took one look at our joined hands beneath the table and smiled like she had figured us out years before we had. Caleb was taking his time understanding himself, and I never pushed him toward an answer. Some days he had questions. Some days he had none. What mattered was that he never treated me like uncertainty. He chose me clearly, in all the small ways that had always mattered most. One Saturday morning, sunlight poured through my apartment windows while Caleb stood near the kitchen attempting to make pancakes and insisting the smoke detector was overly sensitive. I lifted my camera. Do not, he warned, holding a spatula like it might protect his dignity. Too late. I took the picture. He looked at me and shook his head. Another one? Yeah. You already have approximately 10,000 pictures of me. This one is different. His expression softened. How? I lowered the camera. 8 years ago, I had photographed the person I loved while believing I would always have to love him quietly. Now Caleb crossed the room, took my free hand, and stood beside me as naturally as if he had finally arrived somewhere he had been traveling toward all along. I do not want to forget this version of us, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. You will not. I raised the camera again. Caleb smiled, not at the lens, but at me. I pressed the shutter. The soft click captured an ordinary Saturday morning, a ruined batch of pancakes, sunlight across the floor, and the man who had spent years being my safest place before either of us understood why. For so long, I had believed loving Caleb meant accepting that some feelings had to remain unspoken. I had been wrong. Sometimes love did not arrive as a sudden revelation. Sometimes it grew quietly inside 8 years of phone calls, empty diner seats, airport goodbyes, and ordinary days until distance finally revealed what closeness had allowed us to overlook. Caleb squeezed my hand. Breakfast? He asked. I smiled and looked toward the smoking pan. Maybe the diner. He laughed, grabbed his coat, and waited by the door for me. This time, when I followed him, neither of us had to wonder what we were walking toward.